What happens when a man with a badge and a bias runs out of road? When the person he chose to humiliate turns out to be the one man in the entire city who decides whether he has a career tomorrow. This is that story. It started on a Tuesday evening in late October in Columbus, Ohio. The kind of evening where the sky turns purple just before it goes dark and the streets empty out slowly, block by block. Most people were heading home. Most people were tired. Most people just wanted dinner and a quiet night. Marcus Webb was no different. He had been in back-to-back meetings since 7 that morning. 16 hours of conference calls, budget reviews, and a tense sit-down with the city council that had run 2 hours longer than scheduled. He was in his personal car, not a city vehicle, because he had driven himself to an evening fundraiser on the east side and was cutting through the Hilliard corridor to get back to his house in Upper Arlington. He had loosened his tie somewhere around the third stoplight. His jacket was folded on the passenger seat. He was listening to Miles Davis on low volume, the window cracked just enough to let in the cool air. Marcus Webb did not look like what people expected when they heard his title. He was 44 years old, broad-shouldered, dark-skinned, with close-cut hair going gray at the temples. He wore no jewelry except a plain watch his late father had given him. He drove a charcoal gray Audi, clean but not flashy. He was not the kind of man who needed to announce himself. In his mind, the work did that. What Marcus Webb was professionally was the chief of police for the city of Columbus. But Officer Dale Pruitt did not know that. Not yet. Pruitt was parked in his usual spot on Fishinger Road, nose of the cruiser tucked just far enough behind the tree line to be invisible until he wanted to be seen. He was on his third cup of coffee, 2 hours into a shift that had given him nothing to show for it. He was 31 years old, 5 years on the force, and he had the kind of energy that needed a target to burn itself on. His supervisors had documented it twice. A complaint from a motorist in 2021, a use of force review in 2022 that got quietly buried. Pruitt had learned from neither of those. He had only learned that certain things slid and certain people let them. His eyes caught the Audi the moment it passed the intersection. It wasn't the car that triggered him. It wasn't the speed, because Marcus was doing exactly 32 in a 35 zone. It wasn't the lane. It wasn't a broken taillight or an expired sticker. It was something Pruitt would later struggle to put into words that didn't make him sound like exactly what he was. He just decided to pull the car over. And that decision, made in the span of about 4 seconds on a quiet Tuesday evening in October, was going to unravel everything. The lights came on behind Marcus without warning. He glanced in the rearview mirror, blinked once, and calmly moved to the right. He pulled over onto the shoulder near a strip mall, put the car in park, and turned the hazards on. That was the habit of a man who had spent decades understanding exactly what these moments could become if you didn't control your own behavior inside them. He kept his hands on the steering wheel. Pruitt got out of the cruiser fast. That was the first thing. He didn't walk. He moved with purpose, the kind of manufactured urgency that had no basis in anything actually happening. His hand was on his belt before he was halfway to the car. His face was already set in that expression, hard, bored, superior, like he had already decided what this was and who this person was before a single word had been exchanged. He knocked on the window twice, sharp. Marcus rolled it down. Yeah, Pruitt said. License. Registration. No greeting. No explanation. Just a demand issued to the top of Marcus's head because Pruitt hadn't even bothered to lower himself to eye level. Marcus kept his voice steady. Officer, can you tell me why I was pulled over? Pruitt leaned slightly on the door. You were swerving. Marcus didn't blink. I wasn't swerving. Pruitt's jaw tightened. You were swerving. I saw it. Now I need your license and registration. Let's not make this something it doesn't need to be. That last sentence. Let's not make this something it doesn't need to be. Marcus had heard that line before. It was a warning dressed up as a courtesy. It meant, comply, don't ask questions, don't expect to be treated like a full human being in this interaction. It was a line built on the assumption that the person receiving it had no choice but to absorb it quietly. Marcus did not absorb things quietly. Not anymore. Not after 22 years in law enforcement. But he also knew how to pick the moment. And this was not the moment for that. He reached slowly into his glove box, withdrew the registration, and then reached for his wallet. He handed over his driver's license first. Pruitt took it without looking at him and turned back toward the cruiser to run it. That was when Marcus made a quiet decision of his own. He reached into his jacket on the passenger seat and pulled out his department credentials. Not his driver's license, not his personal ID, his official identification as chief of police. He held in his hand and waited. Pruitt came back 2 minutes later. He handed the license through the window and said, "Step out of the car." Marcus didn't move. On what basis? Pruitt's eyes narrowed. "I said step out of the car. I'm going to conduct a field sobriety check." Marcus looked at him directly for the first time. "I have not been drinking. I was not swerving. And I have not been given a lawful reason for this stop. I'd like one." Something shifted in Pruitt's face. It wasn't reflection. It wasn't doubt. It was annoyance. The kind that comes when someone in authority is told no by someone they have decided is beneath them. He opened the door. He actually reached over, grabbed the handle, and swung the door open. "Get out," he said. "Now." Marcus looked at the open door. Then he looked at Pruitt. Then, calmly and without a single raised word, he held up the credentials in his right hand. Pruitt stared at them for a second without registering what he was seeing. Then his eyes focused. Then the color changed in his face, not all at once, but slowly, like a tide going out. The gold seal of the Columbus Division of Police. The words printed clearly beneath it. The photograph that matched the man sitting in the car. Chief of Police. Marcus Webb. Pruitt did not move. The hand still resting on the car door went stiff. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. Marcus held the credentials steady and said nothing. He let the silence do its work. It took about 8 full seconds before Pruitt found any words at all. "Sir, he started." Marcus cut him off. Not with anger. With something worse. With calm. "I'm going to step out of the car now," he said. "Not because you ordered me to, but because I like to have this conversation face to face." He got out, straightened his shirt, stood there in the headlights of his own car, unhurried, unbothered, and absolutely in command of every molecule of what was happening. Pruitt had 4 inches of height on him, but height meant nothing in this moment, and they both knew it. Marcus looked at him for a long count. "You pulled me over with no cause," he said. "You refused to give me a reason for the stop when I asked. You ordered me out of my vehicle without justification. And then you physically opened my car door without legal basis to do so. Do you understand what those things are?" Pruitt's throat moved. "Sir, I didn't know." Marcus held up one hand. "I know you didn't know. But here's what I need you to understand right now, officer. Not knowing who I am does not change what you did. If I were any other man in that car tonight, none of those protections existed for him. You pulled him over because of what you saw through a windshield, and you treated him like a problem before he said a single word." Pruitt looked at the ground. Marcus wasn't done. "Do you have a body camera?" "Yes, sir." "Is it running?" Pruitt hesitated. "Yes, sir." "Good," Marcus said, "because everything that just happened is on it. And I want you to think very carefully about what that footage is going to show when someone reviews it tomorrow morning." The silence between them stretched wide. Somewhere down the road, a dog was barking. A car passed on the opposite side, slowed almost to a stop when the driver saw the lights, then kept moving. Pruitt looked like a man who had just stepped off a curb and discovered the ground was not where he thought it was. Marcus looked at him without cruelty, just steadily, the way a man looks when he has made his decision and he is at peace with it. "Go back to your cruiser," Marcus said. "Into the stop." And with that, he got back in his Audi, put it in drive, and pulled off into the dark. He called his deputy chief from the car. "It's Marcus. I need you to pull body cam footage from Officer Pruitt on the Hilliard corridor. Tonight, around 9:45. Get it to my desk before I come in tomorrow. And pull his file. Full disciplinary history. Everything." He hung up, put the phone in the cup holder, turned Miles Davis back up, but he did not feel like listening to music anymore. Dale Pruitt drove back to the station on autopilot. He logged out his shift 10 minutes early, sat in his car in the parking garage for a while, and stared at the steering wheel. He kept replaying the moment he saw the credentials, the gold seal, the photograph, the title, Chief of Police, Marcus Webb. He had heard that name plenty. Everyone in the Columbus PD had. Marcus Webb had been appointed chief 16 months earlier after coming up through the ranks in Cleveland, earning a reputation for being tough on misconduct and even tougher on the culture that allowed it to grow. His first week in Columbus, he had terminated 2 officers and suspended 4 more. He didn't make speeches about it. He just did it. And Pruitt had not only pulled him over without cause. He had opened his car door. He put his face in his hands. He thought about calling his union rep. He thought about calling his wife. He thought about a dozen different ways this could be explained, reframed, softened. He was just following procedure. He had observed something that concerned him. The car had been moving erratically, and he had a duty to investigate. But then he thought about the body camera, and the thought died. He went home, didn't sleep. The next morning, Marcus Webb arrived at headquarters at 7:15. He stopped at the front desk, nodded to the officer on duty, grabbed his coffee from the break room without stopping to talk to anyone, and went up to his office on the 4th floor. His deputy chief, Angela Rhodes, was already there. "I pulled the footage," she said, closing the door behind her. Marcus sat down. "Show me." She opened her laptop and pressed play. They watched it together in silence. All of it, from a moment Pruitt's cruiser pulled out of the tree line to the moment Marcus drove away. Every second of it. The approach without greeting. The demand without reason. The dismissal of Marcus's question. The door. When it was over, Angela closed the laptop. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't say, "I can't believe it." She was too professional for that. What she said was, "What do you want to do?" Marcus looked out his window at the city. Columbus in the morning, the skyline catching the early light, the streets already moving. "Pull his full record," he said. "Then schedule a formal review board for Friday. I want his direct supervisor and the assistant chief in the room. And I want Pruitt there." Angela nodded. "And one more thing," Marcus said. "This doesn't go to the press. Not from our side. If it leaks, it leaks. But I'm not running a press conference on this. This is an internal accountability matter, and I want it handled as one." Angela paused. "Some people would say you have standing to make this very public, Marcus. Considering what happened." Marcus turned from the window. "I'm not interested in what I have standing to do. I'm interested in what's right. A public spectacle doesn't fix the culture. What fixes the culture is what happens in that review room on Friday." Angela picked up her folder and left. Marcus sat alone for a moment. He thought about last night, about sitting in that car with the door swung open beside him by a man who had decided in 4 seconds that he was the kind of person doors got opened on, without asking, without reason, just on sight. He had been in law enforcement long enough to know that what happened to him happened to other people every single day. People without credentials in their jacket pocket. People without the title printed on a gold-sealed card. People who had no protection from it except their own dignity, which Pruitt's kind never respected anyway. That was the thing that stayed with him. Not the indignity of it, the familiarity of it. He picked up his pen and got to work. By Wednesday, word had gotten inside the building. These things always move faster than you expect in a police department. Hallways talk. Locker rooms talk. The break room especially talks. And the story that was moving through headquarters had one central fact lodged in the middle of it like a splinter. Pruitt pulled over the chief. Some officers heard it and laughed, the nervous kind of laughter people use when they're not sure how to process something. Some heard it and went quiet, the way people go quiet when they realize the music has stopped and they're not standing where they thought they were. A few were outwardly uncomfortable, not with what Pruitt had done, but with where it had landed. Pruitt himself showed up for Wednesday's shift because he had no official reason not to. Nobody had told him to stay home. No suspension had been issued. The formal review wasn't until Friday. So he put on his uniform, drove to the station, and walked in through the same door he always walked through. But the morning was different. People who usually said, "Good morning," did not. Not in a dramatic way, not in a pointed way, just with that subtle, almost invisible adjustment people make when they're recalculating. His partner for the shift, Officer Ray Mendez, greeted him normally, asked how he was doing, and then went quiet in a way that said he already knew and didn't know what to do with it. Pruitt spent most of the shift in his head. He kept circling back to the moment on Fishinger Road. Not the credential reveal, but before that. The moment he made the decision to pull the Audi over. He kept trying to remember what exactly had triggered it, and the more he reached for a legitimate answer, the further it got from him. The car was clean. The driving was clean. The street was quiet. There was no call, no complaint, no visible violation. There was just a black man in a nice car driving at night. Pruitt had told himself a story in those 4 seconds. A story that felt like instinct but was built from something else entirely. Something he'd never examined. Something the department's culture had never required him to examine. Because for 5 years, the machinery around him had absorbed the consequences of that story, so he never had to face them directly. Until now. Friday came the way consequential days always do. Quietly at first, then all at once. The formal review was held in Conference Room B on the 3rd floor. It seated 12. That morning it held 6. Marcus at the head of the table. Deputy Chief Rhodes to his left. Assistant Chief Gerald Fontaine on the right. Pruitt's direct supervisor, Lieutenant Carla Baines, beside him. A union representative named Howard Sill, who had been in these rooms more times than he liked to count. And Dale Pruitt. Pruitt wore his dress uniform. His hands were folded on the table. His face was controlled. Marcus opened the folder in front of him without ceremony. Officer Pruitt, this review has been convened following an incident on the evening of October 19th, in which you conducted a traffic stop without documented cause, refused to provide a reason for the stop when directly asked, proceeded to a field sobriety check without basis, and made physical contact with a vehicle door without legal authority to do so. The entire stop was captured on your body camera. Are those facts disputed? Pruitt looked at him. No, sir. The room held still. Marcus continued. I've reviewed your full file. In 5 years, you have 2 documented complaints and 1 use of force review. Your evaluations are otherwise acceptable. Your attendance record is clean. There is nothing here that marks you as a bad officer by standard metrics. Pruitt said nothing. But I want to ask you something, Marcus said, leaning forward slightly. Not for the record, just between the people in this room. When you saw that car on Fishinger Road on Tuesday night, what exactly did you see that made you pull out? Pruitt was quiet for a long moment. The union rep shifted in his chair. I saw a vehicle, and I made a judgment call. Pruitt finally said. Based on what? Marcus asked. Another pause. Pruitt's jaw worked. I'm not sure I can fully explain it. Marcus nodded slowly. I know you can't. And that's the problem, officer. Not the stop. Not even the door. The problem is that you made a decision that had real consequences for a real person. And when you sit here today, you cannot tell me what that decision was based on. Because there was nothing. No violation. No call. No cause. Just a choice. The room was very quiet. And I need you to sit with that, Marcus said. Because that man in the car you pulled over, whoever he might have been, he didn't deserve to have his door opened. He didn't deserve to be ordered out onto a shoulder with no explanation. He didn't deserve to be treated like a suspect for driving while black in a city that is supposed to protect him. Pruitt's eyes dropped to the table. The fact that it was me in that car, Marcus continued, doesn't make what you did worse. It just made it visible in a way that can't be dismissed. And I am not going to dismiss it. Pruitt looked up. Marcus held his gaze. Dale Pruitt, you are hereby suspended without pay for 30 days, pending mandatory completion of a departmental bias review and cultural competency training program. At the end of that period, you will be evaluated for reinstatement. During that evaluation, we will be looking not just at your paperwork, but at who you have decided to be in this job. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Pruitt said. His voice was flat, not defiant, not broken either, just flat. The union rep started to open his mouth. Marcus held up a hand. Howard, I've already reviewed the contractual thresholds. We are within them on all counts. If you'd like to file a grievance, that is your right. But I want to be honest with you. The footage of this stop is clear, documented, and unambiguous. I would not recommend making this a public fight. Howard closed his mouth. The meeting was over in 40 minutes. As people filed out, Pruitt lingered near the door. He looked like he wanted to say something. Marcus was gathering his folder, not rushing, not avoiding him. Finally, Pruitt said, quietly enough that it was only between the two of them. For what it's worth, I didn't know who you were. Marcus stopped, looked at him, and said something that Pruitt would carry with him for a very long time after that room. I know that, and I need you to understand that's not a defense. It's a whole point. Pruitt walked out. Marcus stood alone in the conference room for a moment. The city hummed outside the windows. Somewhere down the hall a phone was ringing. In the weeks that followed, something shifted inside the Columbus PD, quietly, without announcement, but with weight. The body camera footage was reviewed by the Oversight Committee as a matter of protocol. 3 officers who had served under the same direct supervisor as Pruitt were flagged for additional review based on prior complaint patterns. 2 procedural updates were issued department-wide on the standards for initiating a traffic stop. None of it was flashy. None of it made the evening news. Marcus had made sure of that. He gave one internal address to the full department 2 weeks after the review board. He stood at the front of the briefing room in his uniform. No notes, no podium, just himself and the room. I was pulled over on October 19th, he said. Most of you know that by now. What I want to talk about is not what happened to me. I want to talk about what happens every night in this city to people who don't have my credentials in their jacket pocket. They get stopped without cause. They get ordered out of cars without reason. They get treated like suspects by people whose badge requires them to protect. And most of the time, there is no review board. There is no suspension. There is no accountability. There is just a man standing on the side of a road being reminded that some people in this city still do not see him as a full person. The room was silent. That is the job we have failed at, Marcus said. And I am not pointing fingers at all of you. Most of you serve with integrity every day. But integrity isn't enough if the culture we operate inside hasn't been honest about what it carries. We carry bias. This department carries it. Every institution carries it. The question isn't whether it's there. The question is whether we have the courage to look at it directly and do the work to change it. He paused, looked around the room. The badge is not a free pass, he said. It is a promise. You made that promise when you raised your hand. I made that promise. And I'm going to hold every single one of us to it, including myself. He stepped back from the front of the room. Nobody clapped. It wasn't that kind of moment. But nobody looked away either. They sat with it, the way you sit with something true that costs something to hear. 3 months later, Pruitt completed his suspension and his mandatory program. His reinstatement evaluation was thorough. It took 3 weeks. At the end of it, Marcus read the report carefully, cover to cover, then signed a recommendation. Pruitt was reinstated, reassigned to a community liaison role in a district where he would spend his shifts building relationship rather than running traffic stops. It was not a punishment, not officially, but it was a message, clear and deliberate. The job could be done differently. He was going to learn how. On the day Pruitt returned to the building, Marcus was in the lobby, not waiting for him, just moving through on his way to a meeting. They passed each other near the elevator. Pruitt stopped. Marcus stopped. A moment stretched between them. Not comfortable, not hostile, just honest. Pruitt said, I've been thinking about what you said. In the conference room. That not knowing wasn't a defense. Marcus said nothing, just waited. Pruitt exhaled. I've been thinking about it a lot, actually. Good, Marcus said. That's where the work starts. The elevator opened. Marcus stepped in. The doors closed. Pruitt stood in the lobby for a moment alone. Then he walked toward his new assignment. It was a beginning. A hard, overdue, necessary beginning. Months later, Marcus was asked to speak at a law enforcement leadership summit in Cincinnati. 300 officers from departments across Ohio sat in a ballroom with good lighting and bad coffee. They expected statistics, policy proposals, the usual architecture of a keynote. What they got instead was a story. Marcus stood at the podium without notes and told them about October 19th. He told them about Miles Davis on the radio and the tie he had loosened at the third stoplight. He told them about the headlights in his mirror and the knock on the window and the door that had been opened without invitation. He told them all of it plainly, the way plain truth lands when it has been sitting in you for a while. The room was completely still. He told them about what it felt like to be looked at like a problem before a single word was exchanged. He told them about the 1,000 people every day who experienced that same look without any of the protections he carried in his pocket. And then he told them something he had never said out loud in a professional setting before. "I have been in law enforcement for 22 years, he said, and I've spent a lot of that time being the only person who looked like me in the room. And I have watched this system protect its own at the expense of the people it was built to serve. I have watched complaints disappear. I have watched footage get lost. I have watched the machinery do what machinery does when nobody demands it behave differently." He gripped the sides of the podium. "That night on Fishinger Road, I was reminded that I am still that man. Not just the chief, not just the title. I am still the black man in the car who has to decide in real time how to stay safe in an encounter with someone who has decided before it starts that I am the lesser party. I live in both of those realities. I always have." He looked out at the room. "And I am here today to tell you that if you are in this profession and you have not yet been honest with yourself about what you bring into every traffic stop, every foot pursuit, every use of force decision, then you are a danger. Not because you are evil, but because unchecked bias in a person with a gun and a badge and the authority of the law behind them is one of the most dangerous forces this country produces." The silence in the ballroom was the kind that means people are not just hearing but feeling. "Your badge," Marcus said, "is not a shield against accountability. It is not a permission slip to skip the hard work of examining your own assumptions. It is a promise to every single person in your jurisdiction that they will be seen as a full human being. And if you cannot keep that promise, then I am asking you today to think hard about whether you deserve to carry it." He stepped back from the podium. The applause started slow, then built, then filled the room. Some people stood, some sat and clapped with that private kind of intensity that says something landed in a place that won't be easily moved. Marcus stood at the podium and let it wash over him without performing anything in return. He was done performing. He was just telling the truth. On the drive back to Columbus that evening, he thought about all the men and women who had stood where he stood on the shoulder of that road on an October night, who had hands visible on the steering wheel, who had kept their voice even and their movements deliberate not out of comfort, but out of survival, who had no credentials to produce at the critical moment, who went home and told their families what had happened and heard in return, "Baby, just be careful. Be safe. Don't give them a reason." He thought about what it meant that so much depended on not giving them a reason. He thought about the work still left to do. The highway stretched out ahead of him, Columbus lit against the dark sky in the distance. He turned the music on. Not Miles Davis this time. Something newer, something with more heat in it. He drove home. The badge on his chest said Chief of Police. The man wearing it was not done yet. Let this story be a reminder. Power does not protect you from prejudice. Authority does not insulate you from bias. The only thing that changes a culture is when the people inside it demand honesty from themselves first and accountability from everyone else second. Speak up, document everything, and never let anyone make you feel like the color of your skin is a reason to be afraid of the person whose salary you pay with your taxes. You deserve better, and so does everyone who comes after you.